Welcome to This Explainer. We're about to embark on a seriously incredible journey, tracing the entire evolution of human civilization on the Indian subcontinent. I mean, we're looking at thousands of years of human history here, shifting all the way from wandering hunter-gatherers to the architects of some of the most advanced urban cities the ancient world had ever seen. If you love understanding not just what happened in the past, but why it happened, well, you're in the exact right place. To make this massive 5,000-year epic easy to digest, we've broken it down into 5 chronological eras: the Prehistoric Foundations, the Indus Valley Civilization, the Early Vedic Age, the Later Vedic Age, and finally, the rise of new philosophies. Let's get right to it.
All right, let's dive in with our first timeline. Just look at the immense scale of time here. During the Paleolithic Age, humans were primarily nomadic hunter-gatherers using, crude, unpolished stone tools. Think about this for a second. That primitive era makes up roughly 99% of all human history, literally almost our entire existence. But as the climate gradually warmed up during the Mesolithic phase, we see the very first tentative steps toward domesticating animals, which eventually snowballed into the earliest village settlements.
Which brings us to Chapter 1, Prehistoric Foundations and the Stone Ages. So, driven by this warming planet, humans hit a crucial turning point, what we call the Neolithic Revolution. This was just a monumental transition. Instead of just gathering food, humans adapted to these massive climate shifts by becoming food producers. By domesticating animals and farming crops like wheat and barley, humanity achieved a massive milestone: the very first settled villages. People could finally stay put, build permanent mud brick homes, and actually create pottery to store their surplus food. It was a total game changer. Now, those early agricultural settlements, which began in the Neolithic and Chalcolithic or Copper Stone Ages, they didn't just stay small. They thrived and expanded. As we track this next timeline, you can see how those humble village foundations lead us directly into our second era, transitioning from early settlements into a true, mature, magnificent urban peak right around 2600 BCE. That brings us to Section 2, the Indus Valley Civilization, an absolute urban marvel. Okay, around 2600 BCE, while a huge chunk of the world was still living in highly primitive conditions, the Indus Valley was setting the absolute gold standard for urban living along the floodplains of the Indus River. I mean, we are talking about perfectly gridded streets intersecting at right angles, uniform burnt brick houses, and get this, indoor plumbing that frankly rivals some modern apartment buildings. No joke. They had sophisticated underground drainage networks with maintenance traps thousands of years before ancient Rome even existed. They even built monumental structures like the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, waterproofed with bitumen, just showcasing this incredible, mind-blowing civic engineering.
But here's the mystery. How did this magnificent, perfectly ordered society just collapse? Well, the historical and archaeological communities are kind of split into 2 main camps here. On one hand, we have theories of outside migration or invasion, historically known as the Aryan invasion theory, though the actual evidence for mass conflict remains highly debated. And on the other hand, we have some really compelling evidence of severe environmental shifts. We're talking tectonic activity and climate change, leading to the drying up of vital riverbeds like the Sarasvati. Now, we aren't here to pick a side today, but rather to show you that history is often this complex puzzle of overlapping factors.
So, that brings us to a really pivotal question. What actually happens when a civilization's geographical lifeline completely dries up? Well, the answer is survival through movement. Whether it was driven by shifting climates or demographic pressures, the decline of the Indus Valley forced a massive geographical shift. The population largely moved eastward, away from the Indus and toward the fertile plains of the Ganges. And this massive migration brings us to our third chapter on the timeline, the Early Vedic Age. Stretching from roughly 1500 to 1000 BCE, this era is marked by the arrival and integration of the Indo-Aryans into the subcontinent. Crucially, this period brings the compilation of the Rigveda. This was a massive, revolutionary collection of hymns that forms the absolute cultural and religious bedrock of this huge pivot point in history. So Chapter 3, the Early Vedic Age, an era of pastoral nomads. Now, unlike the highly structured urban Harappans we just looked at, this new society was entirely rural and pastoral. They settled in what was known as the Land of the Seven Rivers. And their tribal chief, the Rajan, he wasn't some king ruling from a giant stone castle. His main job was actually protecting the tribe's cattle. Wealth was quite literally measured in cows, not land. Talk about a literal cash cow, right? The society was incredibly mobile and flexible. In fact, many of their wars were fought simply to capture or defend their herds. It was a fluid society where your occupation didn't strictly dictate your birthright. But as we push forward past 1000 BCE on our timeline, a massive technological leap completely rewrites the rules of Indian society. Right around 800 BCE, we start seeing the widespread use of a new, absolutely game-changing metal. Which leads us to Section 4, the Later Vedic Age, Iron and Empires. Armed with Krishna Ayas, which is iron, these formerly pastoral tribes could finally clear the dense, really stubborn forests of the Gangetic Plains. The cause and effect here is so clear. Iron-tipped plows and axes unlocked incredibly fertile soil, which created a massive agricultural surplus. And because people were now tied to these highly productive farmlands, those flexible, wandering tribes we just talked about, they were suddenly replaced by massive, stationary, territorial kingdoms known as Janapadas. Consequently, the whole social structure completely hardened. The flexible roles of the early Vedic period transformed into a deeply rigid, birth-based Varna system, with power heavily concentrated at the very top. So by 600 BCE, agricultural surplus hits an all-time high. But, as you might expect, this intense rigidification of society, paired with a massive boom in wealth, naturally caused a severe ideological pushback. We start to see the emergence of revolutionary thinkers and entirely new philosophical sects right around 500 BCE. That takes us to our final chapter, Section 5, the rise of new philosophies, specifically Jainism and Buddhism. Enter Vardhamana Mahavira and the core tenet of Jainism, ahimsa. This is the profound principle of non-injury or non-violence. Now, why did this idea catch fire right at this specific moment? Well, because by the 6th century BCE, a new, highly powerful class of merchants had emerged. They were fueled by new punch-marked coinage and booming trade routes. And frankly, they were tired of these rigid social classes that kept them socially inferior. Plus, they wanted an end to the wildly expensive, bloody animal sacrifices. Think about it. Merchants needed peace and stability to conduct their trade. Constant tribal wars and the massive sacrifices of cattle, the very animals they needed to plow the fields. It was disrupting both agriculture and commerce. Ahimsa was the perfect philosophical match because it promoted exactly the kind of peace their economy relied upon. It is just an absolutely perfect historical cause and effect loop. Let's break it down. Step 1. Iron tools create a massive agricultural surplus. Step 2. That surplus enables trade and the creation of coinage. Step 3. The merchant class gains unprecedented economic power. And finally, Step 4. Those newly empowered merchants fund and elevate new peaceful philosophies, completely revolutionizing the religious landscape of the subcontinent. I mean, it's literally economics driving philosophy. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to ask yourself, how does the discovery of a single metal, like iron, end up giving birth to philosophies of peace that still guide millions of people today? History isn't just some dry list of dates you have to memorize. It's a spectacular, unbroken chain reaction of human adaptation, where the swing of an iron axe in a forest directly leads to the birth of ideas that change the world forever. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through ancient India.